Okay, let's get rolling. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sumo Arts and Sacred Sexuality Healing. I'm here with a call again on another podcast. This is kind of like a living roomish conversation. We had this conversation before offline, and we decided to take it online because we felt like it's really worth it. There were a lot of juicy information, and it was very eye-opening for me personally, some of the stuff that Akal shared. So we felt like we want to do a podcast on it, and we're keeping it like really kind of informalish, kind of. It's organic. And for some of you who don't know Akal, I'll leave the links to his website and his channel in the description box. Akal is an astrologer, somatic art therapist, energy healer, and he works with sexual energy as well. Hello, Akal. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So the one thing is, I actually kind of mentioned really quickly is that, you know, when I'm working with sexual energy, generally it's with guys. So I should probably state that. Which is one of the reasons I communicate with you a lot, is because as a man, I inherently, on some level, do not understand women's sexual energy and how it flows. So that would be something I would add to my bio. So yeah.
Perfect. Remember when we were talking like the other day, and I was like sharing with you that how frustrating it is, like when men release, and how like they have kind of withdrawal symptoms that kind of leave a lot of women in the dark, and women don't understand what happens. And I'll just put like my 5 pennies later on that. But I wanted to get, and you shared your perspective about what happens when you were personally releasing semen at one point in your life, and you kind of were not aware first, and then you took me through your awareness journey. So I would love if we can talk again about this and share with our audience.
Yeah. So the one thing I have to kind of state is that I think part of every individual's evolution is to move something from unconscious to aware, right? So in most men, they kind of neglect or take advantage of the sexual energy in the sense of they don't recognize the importance of it, and they don't recognize how it affects us systemically, how it affects us in terms of how we color our life through our perceptions, etc. So a big part of what I consider every man's journey is to learn to operate with, to essentially to connect and to operate using their sexual energy in a very conscious way and with choice. And I think choice is the underlining word here. So that is to ejaculate or not to ejaculate. That is to have sex or not have sex. That is to masturbate or not have masturbate. So most men, they're on autopilot in this regard. So my story, going back to my 20s, is typical. It's absolutely typical. On some level, you know, I mentioned to you earlier that I tend to function through extremes on some level, but nonetheless, I find that my experiences, whether I'm functioning on extremes or not, it really, the extremes simply sort of show that there's a gray scale in terms of, like, for instance, I know several men who they can release and they can keep going. You know, they'll release, and then there's sort of quote unquote refractory period in which the amount of time it takes them to build up in order to have sex again is a much shorter period of time. Me, it tends to be kind of long. And so when I was digging around about this, actually, let me not go there yet. But so what happened to me in my 20s is I would have, you know, whether it was a girlfriend or a fling or whatever the situation was. And that's the thing I have to state here is that the bonding aspect, because I know some people might listen and go, oh, well, you didn't want to bond with that person because they weren't your partner. Nah, that's not the case. I mean, the reality is that when a man ejaculates, and I have to say this, and I've said this 1,000 times, pre-cum, post-cum, different human being, different person, different objectives, different amounts of desire involved. And so, and for men, for better or worse, sexual energy is a huge factor in terms of our desire to connect with someone and to bond with someone and to you know, and they get all gushy, you know what I mean? So what ends up happening with the ejaculation is that there's a severing of a bond, and there is biochemistry involved here. And so there's two different chemicals that play out here. And this is when I was digging around the internet. It was interesting to kind of start reading about these things, because I remember these when I was back in college, and I never really, you know, you just kind of learn and regurgitate in college. And so what ended up happening to me is I was learning these things, but it really didn't sink in terms of the importance until I kind of reflected on the bigger picture. But the two compounds I'm thinking of is oxytocin and prolactin. So these things move in some ways in inverse directions. And what I mean by that is that, so there's with orgasm for men and women both, there is a huge increase in oxytocin, which is the sort of bonding hormone. However, women's increase is way more. Right.
Way more. Yeah.
Exactly. And so with men, though, what we have is when a man ejaculates, well, first off, even through the whole sexual process, men never get the increase in oxytocin even remotely close to what women experience. That's just during the sex itself. And so, so in other words, we're kind of, in a lot of ways, I'm speaking very generally here, we're not constructed to bond at the same level that women do. No. And this is one of the big challenges that we're kind of talking about today. So what ends up happening with ejaculation is that men will get an initial spike in oxytocin immediately after orgasm, and then it decreases in about 5 minutes. So the window of opportunity to bond deeply is 5 minutes post-ejaculation. And what ends up happening inversely is that prolactin ends up increasing. So as prolactin increases, what that means is that prolactin's connected to sperm production. So that increases, it decreases desire, because I want to say that it operates as an antagonist to dopamine anyway. I'm not going to go there. But the point is that there's a chemical that shuts down desire. And so biologically, you know, there's a book I read, I can't remember the title, but the name of the book basically was alluding to the fact that men are not meant to be monogamous. And I disagree wholeheartedly with that. It goes back to choice again. And I think certain men probably are not meant to be monogamous. I think certain other men are definitely meant to be monogamous. So it's individual choice. So any sort of broad epidemiological, you know, brushstroke, making an assumption that all men should be like this is out the door. Now, so what ends up happening is that there's this prolactin goes up, oxytocin goes up briefly, then dips. The woman is still surging with these things. Yes. so she still wants more connection. The guy is like, yeah, I'm done. And so here's the issue. Is depending on what the refractory period is, the amount of time it takes for a man to recharge. And again, some men have way more prolactin, which means that their tendency to, well, I guess their refractory period is much longer because they have so much more of this particular compound. Now, some men have very little of that compound, and so they can recharge much quicker. And I don't want to limit all this to the biochemistry of it, because obviously there's the individual experience. Now, my individual experience is, and I guess I would be a high prolactin person, but what ends up happening for me is that in my 20s, I would just totally unconsciously, I would ejaculate, and then I would always get this feeling of like, I need some space. And the analogy I always use is a dog that's wounded. So you have this wounded dog who, you know, and it hurt its paw or whatever it is. And usually dogs, they don't want to be around people when they're hurt. They don't want to be around anything when they're hurt. They'll go wander off somewhere in order to lick their wounds and to heal. And so myself, that's how I was. I needed to find some separation because there is a sense of loss is what is felt. And
I want you to, sorry, I just wanted you to talk about this. I don't think men get this. I don't think men get that there is this release is actually loss of vital force energy. They don't get that. They don't get that. So maybe you can just kind of like shed light on that a bit.
Will do. what I think what I think is really funny is there's men who I've counseled. They're like, yeah, I'm losing semen, but that's just the fluid. Like they don't understand that there's two levels here, right? So you have the actual fluid, and then you have the energy that's attached to the fluid. And so the thing is that when a man ejaculates, the energy goes with it. So unless, and again, I'm thinking of most average dudes in their 20s, they don't have any tricks in order to reduce the energy loss. That's one of the things I do is I teach men tricks and how to reduce the energy loss. And so one of the things is that, so guy releases, pre-cum, post-cum, we're different person. So once the horny feeling has diminished, his desire to bond is also generally diminished. And this doesn't mean that he won't cuddle. It doesn't mean that kind of thing. But again, it's a spectrum. Some men may continue to want to cuddle and be close. Other men are like, I want to go smoke a cigarette, eat, take a nap, give me space. I'm going to go out to my shed and play with tools. whatever. But the point is that guys oftentimes might want to be alone at that point. And the issue is if there's a dating situation here, and I've had women express this to me in my 20s, and they express this to me in my early 30s, and the whole bit is that, again, this is when I was operating from an unconscious place, that hey, you become so distant, and they didn't equate it to the ejaculation, because women don't ejaculate in the same kind of sense, so they don't know that there's this actual loss of something. And for me, I always felt very wounded after I ejaculated. And again, I couldn't put my finger on what the wound was. I would be, but one of the things I would generally feel is sleepy, tired. And if I'm sleepy and tired, I don't have the energy to give my attention, because attention requires energy. It's attention. Behind tension is talent, is energy. So if I don't have that available, what ends up happening is I'm like, give me space, give me space, give me space. Yeah, and so anyway, a lot of the women, they would respond in a way which they felt hurt. And again, I didn't know I was hurting them, but my desire for space, what it meant that how it would be interpreted was he doesn't want me around. And so I would get two things. I would either get the silent treatment. Oh, you want space? I'll give you space, right? So either I would get the silent treatment, or I would get confrontation, or the woman would, be very direct with me, like, why are you pushing me away? Or, so, are you mad at me? That would be another thing that would come up, and I'd be like, no, I don't know why because I wasn't even aware it was happening, and that's part of the reality. Is like I said, I think a lot of men just don't know what's happening. So where I get a little concerned is, because if let's say there's something culturally that comes into play here. So let's say you have a very macho dynamic that this man is anchored into in terms of his belief system. And so he's got a very macho dynamic, and basically he thinks that women shouldn't have pleasure, or wherever this kind of macho crap is, so the whole point is they get on top, they have sex, they get theirs, and then they're done. So it's almost like it can be taken to an extreme under certain circumstances, where you have both this cultural dynamic plus the pre-cum, post-cum sort of difference. And so in the end, what you could have is women feeling highly neglected, by the end of the engagement. So.
Like my interpretation to that, and I'm just myself included, many women, of course, don't get this, and many women I work with, many women I talk to. So it's more complex in the sense of how do we interpret this? If it's not, I would say, if you don't have a strong foundation, and now we don't take the time before actually, we don't court that in that long period anymore, like before. So you actually get physical way faster than before. So you don't have this strong foundation of love, compassion, etc. So how do we interpret this? We interpret this as he wants to change the cow, simply put. We interpret this that he kind of got tired of us. And let me give you a bit of a context that is really confusing for us. Like a man would be really hot for you if he's like, you know, and he comes over to your place or you go over to his place. But if you go on a trip together and you are at the same space for a longer time, and then the man becomes, and for a woman, this is a chance to bond and have more sex and have more intimacy. And most women have, and I'm talking generally here, so I'm saying most women would have all these fantasies about getting on a trip with a man that they have chemistry with, especially if they've already tried and the chemistry was good and they were having sex, and then they go to that hotel room or on that vacation, and the desire of the man significantly diminishes. And this is, for us, is a big question mark. And of course, because sex itself is a very vulnerable situation, because I would say you don't just get physically naked. Like I always explain to my clients, physically naked is the least vulnerable situation now. The most vulnerable is actually emotionally naked, is spiritually naked. Like when you are in this vulnerable situation, you just say, you know, without saying, I want to be loved and accepted. So after that, when we interpret this as, simply put, rejection. Like if we go out and he's aloof or distant, or he doesn't want to hug as much, or who doesn't want to hold hands, or he's keeping his distance, or he's on the phone, then we interpret this as being as he's bored with us, like he kind of got his thing and he's not interested anymore. And the issue with this, the issue of this, and men don't really get that as much, that women need mostly, and I'm also generalizing, need a lot of emotional security, need to feel emotionally secure in the relationship. And this goes back to what you said, like the prolactin and diminishes the desire. Because if we go back to caveman, cavewoman, that is, I fertilize this soil, I want to spread the seed, I want to move on to the next, right? This is your reptilian brain, the reptilian part of the brain, the primitive part of the brain. And for us, this also inherently, like this man is gonna move on, right? It's kind of embedded in our psyche, that so we need much more reassurance after having sex with a man, if it's not kind of like a hookup or just a one night stand, if it's just in a limbo kind of relationship, or just kind of testing the waters. And I'm just I'm telling all the guys that I coach, or my clients, my friends, guys, if your woman is emotionally insecure in the relationship, we are not going to invest in you, period. We're going to keep our options open. We're not going to invest in you because you don't make us feel secure in the relationship. And I'm not saying that women are the only ones who feel that way, because men also do feel emotional insecurity. And I was like recently coaching a guy who was just complaining about his girlfriend going out. When she goes out with him, she's not giving him attention, and he doesn't feel like they are an item, and all these kind of stuff. So it's not only women, but what I'm saying is women mostly need a lot of emotional security, especially after sex. So when this happens, you get all kinds of like reactions, as you said, like either the silent treatment or being confrontational, or if I'm a sensitive person and I have a big ego, then I'm going to be distant and aloof, and I'll give you a taste of your medicine. So and most guys actually don't understand that, because they come back and they are all lovey-dovey and they don't get the same reaction from us, because okay, we're not going to act on a switch, you know. So it's important to understand also the play of biochemistry here. Women get energized by sex and orgasm, and they would want more, and men, as you say, like kind of go and lick their wounds. And yeah, so it's a very interesting dynamic.
It is. I mean, something that kind of came up, I wrote down some notes while you were talking, and didn't mean to be rude, but wrote down some notes. So
okay.
So yeah, the thing that I wrote down was actually, you mentioned this whole idea of changing the cow. And first off, the term always made me kind of laugh a little bit, but I get it. So here's the interesting thing is that it's either change the cow or change the sexual act. So in other words, I need more spice in the sexual activity, something that provokes him mentally, so that, if you get stimulated here, you're going to get stimulated down there kind of idea. But that's what I would call top-down stimulation. So as opposed to bottom-up, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but there is bottom-up stimulation, which is that life naturally presents itself, creates a stimulation, and then the man rises to the occasion. Whereas up here, it's usually provoked through a fantasy, a kink, role play, or something psychological in nature to create the stimulus from down below. Pornography would be a top-down stimulation. So, but here, the interesting thing that kind of came up is that, so this idea of changing the cow or changing the sexual dynamic, it never works. It's a constantly escalating process, because if the same pattern is happening over and over and over again, which is attach, detach, attach, detach, attach, detach, chronically over time, that gets, it's very interesting to observe what happens there, because what ends up happening, obviously, yes, it's the biological imperative to reproduce and to spread one's genetics. But, we as human beings, and I always bring up my master, the squirrel. So I had a very powerful experience of a squirrel once, where I was in the woods and I was feeling really heavy and depressed one day. And I saw the squirrel running around doing squirrel things, right? Which is like getting nuts and burying nuts and doing what squirrels do. And I remember hearing a voice in my head when I was connecting to this squirrel, which the squirrel says, the only thing here that isn't present is you. And because squirrel the level of cognition isn't functioning in a way where they're like playing with the dualities. Squirrel's like, yeah, I need to store up nuts for the winter. Done. Ants are doing what ants do. Mushrooms are doing what mushrooms do. Every living thing is simply doing what it's doing on an instinctual level. Human beings, we have this cognition that says, yes, I can function on an instinctual level, which means that I could be, polygamous, and I could have sex with this person and 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 spread my seed like so. But again, that's to perpetuate the species. As humanity has learned that, sex can be used in all these different ways. It's not just for reproduction, it's also for pleasure and all these other things. And what ends up happening is that we also kind of realize along the way that, particularly as life got more expensive, we started to realize, geez, there's this kind of side effect to me inseminating multiple women, is that now I've got multiple kids that I have to take care of. So this doesn't make sense. So monogamy is the solution regarding this whole desire to spread the seed repeatedly. However, what ends up happening here, and this is that whole change the cow philosophy, as well as altering the sexual dynamic, is, so what happens chronically over time? So I'm going to speak about women a little bit here too, because I've known several women who are like, oh, we can be just like men. We can have sex just like men and be as shallow as men, and we can do. No, not buying it. The reality, and I'm saying probably there are handfuls of women who can be completely detached about everything. And, I've probably met one or two of those. But what ends up happening has to do with the orgasm. So the chronic orgasm that a woman can have, and women often can have multiple, you get spikes in oxytocin repeatedly. So if she's having sex with the same dude repeatedly, even though she's like, oh yeah, we're just friends of benefits, we're just friends of benefits, we're just friends of benefits, over and over and over again, the repetition of orgasm creates bond, 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 bond. Let's say after a year of having a friends of benefit dynamic with someone, feelings will happen. And so that's something that happens. And then with a guy, it's the detachment. Ejaculation, done. Ejaculation, done. Ejaculation, done. Creates detachment chronically over time. So anyway, that's what always has to be kind of looked at in these dynamics, is that what happens over the course of time repeatedly. If men are in a relationship, in a committed monogamous relationship where they don't want to stray, then they really have to watch out for the ejaculation issue. I've counseled so many men who are in marriage situations that are all like messed up, and it's funny because they'll blame so much. Oh, she put on weight. Oh, what's another one I've heard? Oh, I just don't desire her anymore. It's nothing wrong with her. It's just that, my eyes go to other women. And I'm like, gosh, does that have anything to do with you? Are you somehow a victim of like some sort of magnetic force existing outside of you that keeps pulling you to look at other women? No, you're a function of your behaviors and your biochemistry in a lot of ways. And so, because we have to find this balance between being aware cognitive species that has an instinctual drive. And so in the end, like I said, I think it's really amusing that guys never go back to the most basic thing. Pre-cum, post-cum, we're different people. So if you're chronically ejaculating, you're chronically severing a bond, which over time is going to reduce desire you have for the person you are with. And then there will be the desire to switch out the cow or to add something kinky or whatever it is. But the reality is the solution is don't ejaculate, or at least make it more infrequent. So,
and it's funny because the opposite happens with us. We become actually more attached. So even we might start off in the relationship and we're not really that attached to the man, and we just like, okay, it's just a fling, it's a hookup, we're just doing it for for sex, and then the woman actually is the one who gets more and more attached. So yeah, it's just a very interesting dynamic. But so not every, like a lot of men don't want to go into the rabbit hole of like the semen retention practices and doing all this and what I've seen is so many of them actually don't see the real benefit of that and don't see the real value of that. So do you think there are some kind of like halfway practices or tips that maybe you can share that can save these relationships from having like to cracking up and kind of like falling and failing and all this? Is there a middle way?
Yeah, there is and there isn't. It's not an all or, it's not an all or nothing kind of dynamic that happens here. But really the issue isn't okay, here's the bottom line. Guys have to ejaculate less, period. There's no way around it. Whether they're doing like, some sort of, I've been doing semen retention practices for 15 years, and sometimes I go a month, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's only a week, other times it's 40 days. Longest I went was a year, maybe actually almost 3 years. So the point is that there's different periods of time that I've done this. So, because here's one of the issues is that if somebody is so absolutist about like, I am not ejaculating, it also serves another issue. It creates another issue, which is a stringency or a lockdown on the energy itself. That is if they're applying too much, I would say, a Saturnian force or a discipline. So if there's too much force being applied to retaining the semen, it can create this other dynamic. And so something like what the universe basically helped wake me up in that regard, because like I was like one of those lock it down kind of people because I'm very disciplined. I've been doing yoga every day for 20 years and I'd never miss a practice and this and that. I'm very disciplined. It's natural for me. So, but one of the issues there is repression. And so, so the dynamic that has to be understood here is that you have repression and expression. So the repression aspect is I'm going to be super disciplined. I'm going to lock down this energy and this and that. That creates another kind of imbalance. And the imbalance I experienced was overwhelming sexual desire. The other thing that came up was I was unable to shift the energy. I was not able to transmute it. And because one of the problems is that I was locking it down, in which continued to hold it. So the problem here is whether you're expressing it or repressing it has to do with you lock it in that particular chakra, which is the sexual energy chakra, we'll say. And so you're locking it into that space. So even though what's supposed to be ideally done with semen retention practices is that you're not repressing nor expressing, you're operating from a place of neutrality, objectivity, and choice. So the middle path here is the choice, the application of choice to come or not to come. Because when I was overly repressing, the universe says, hey, nocturnal emission for you. And so I would have wet dreams. I never had wet dreams throughout my entire youth, never had wet dreams, but I was ejaculating all the time. So I was not getting substantial pressure built up. So as I was started to, so I said earlier, it was like 1 year to 3 years, it was the longest period I went. Well, that's aside from nocturnal emissions. That's how I was like, oh, I guess I kind of retained, but didn't, because I had multiple wet dreams during that period of time. So God was like, hey, you gotta let this go. You're getting obsessive. And so I'd say that there is, and I did a video on this, which I'll post down below this, which talks about when are good times for men to release. And this has to do, again, the middle path is always about the application of choice. And so there's something else I was going to say about this, but I just think it's kind of interesting. To me, it's like God's big joke here. You know, God's big joke is that they created men and women who operate on kind of like different spectrums in terms of desire and bonding, and also where I would say the energy is naturally gathered. And I've pretty much, I would probably say 90% of the videos I've done, I brought up this same example, which is there was a Taoist book I was reading, and it had the most simple depiction I've ever seen that explained so much. And again, it's a generalization. And I have to say, I always have to say that, oh, it's a generalization, because I can hear guys and women in the background. I was going, not like that. Yeah, generally we are like this. What we are like is men, stick figure. You can picture a stick figure. You have a plus sign by the genitals and a minus sign by the heart. Women, plus sign by the heart, minus sign by the genitals. So in other words, we're like really great puzzle pieces, but we have a lot to figure out in terms of how to make those puzzle pieces fit in a way that's harmonious. I'm not saying correct or incorrect. I'm saying harmonious. Harmonious there's no judgment here about something being right or wrong. It's simply like, hey, this is working or it's not working, you know? And so what ends up happening is if a guy is ejaculating, the energy, so he has this opportunity. This is part of what transmutation is. Guys think, oh, I'm transmuting the energy, I'm going to be able to, like, you know, paint a masterpiece or do something creative or to build my business and earn more money. And that's very egoic thought. The reality is it's simply about elevating the energy to the level of the heart. And so once the energy is elevated to the level of the heart, this is the balance point from the higher chakras and the lower chakras. So once you're operating from the heart, you kind of have access to both. And the heart gives you courage and bravery, which is needed in life in general, but it's also needed if you are a meditator and you're going into deep other states of awareness. I've had many deep states of awareness I've fallen into where I was not heart-centered, and it was terrifying. You fall into a void, or, you know, whatever kind of weird stuff comes up in meditation sometimes. But so for me, that's like, you know, one of God's big jokes is that there's a lot to figure out here. You know, it's not as simple as penis inside vagina, ta-da, right? There's energetic dynamics that have to be understood, because I've had this thought a million times. Why is it that human beings don't have a mating season, right? Like, you know, every other animal has, like, seemingly has a mating season. Humans, like, we're like, all year is mating season. And you know, and that's it. Yes, I mean, I think that maybe we're less motivated certain times a year than other times a year. Perhaps the winter is not as exciting, but some people think the winter is a better time to have sex because it's all cozy and warm inside, and, you know, whatever. The reality is, though, is that it's kind of one of those things that I've always speculated about, is why humans don't have a mating season. It's because we have the capacity to use sexual energy for other purposes, which is the elevate consciousness. And it's also to elevate our bond between, if you're in a relationship with someone, to elevate that bond. But the responsibility the man has to take responsibility for the sexual energy if he is interested in elevating the connection between him and his wife or girlfriend or whoever it is. So, so anyway, yeah, there's someone else I was going to try to get remember.
So I have like one of the modules I teach something called cosmic sexuality, and in this module, which is, it actually, of course, it's also with kind of adheres to sexual energy transmutation and semen retention and you know, and whatnot. but it actually does not favor that a man, when he wants to release, should not release with his partner. So this severing of bond does not happen. So in this module, for instance, or in this, they kind of talk about more releasing orally with the woman, or that the woman maybe swallows, or something of, or releasing on his own, so not to sever the bond between him and his partner. And I remember that one of the texts or books that I've read, they call this phenomenon specifically, and I don't remember where I read it. It's called the Black Widow effect. They call it the Black Widow effect, like when a man, kind of like this severing of bond happens with the woman, that he does not want to connect with the woman after ejaculating or releasing the semen. So what do you think about this? What do you think when a man releases? Should he release with his partner and naturally just ejaculate and kind of like, or how do you think they should release?
So let me see if I understand what you kind of explained. So this module you're looking at from some sexual education thing, it says that the guy should, if he's going to release, he should do it through masturbation or otherwise, correct? Like, or in her mouth, or like,
yeah, or orally, but not, yeah, but
I don't agree. I don't agree for a couple reasons. Well, I agree on one level, which is when men masturbate and ejaculate, the biochemistry involved, that's this prolactin, et cetera, he doesn't get the same level of elevation in those biochemicals, right? So he doesn't get the oxytocin either. So masturbation is a flat experience for most men. There is an elevation of oxytocin, which makes me laugh. These guys are looking at pornography. So the same thing I mentioned earlier, which is chronically doing something repetitively over and over and over again. It affects men too, because the reality is that men do get elevations in oxytocin, which means that there is a bonding factor here. It's less extreme, right? So men do want to bond chronically over time, but the question is the disconnect from, from the prolactin. I'm going to use prolactin and oxytocin like they're a thing. The reality is what we're talking about is connecting and disconnecting. So men have the capacity to bond, and so they bond, and then they release, they bond, and then they release, and they bond, and then release. And again, it really has to do with the depth of bonding, but over time, it creates an attachment just the same. It's just the magnitude of attachment is different than what women experience. So now, if a man is masturbating, let's say he's looking at pornography, what's he becoming attached to?
A screen.
Yeah, he's becoming attached to something he's fetishized. Because I don't know a single dude who doesn't whack off the pornography, isn't looking around for that perfect scene. You know what I mean? And so we end up fetishizing certain scenes or particular porn stars or whatever it is. And the reality is like, we don't even, this is unconscious behavior. Like, guys are not asking, is that really what I want to bond with? And then they wonder, like, when they get porn addiction, like, gosh, why is it so hard to break porn addiction? I wonder. So one of the things I thought was, we're talking about here is this, what was it? It was conditioned bonding. So going back to, yeah, that's right. You were talking about when to
releasing.
Discharge.
Yeah.
Right. So the releasing thing is, all right. So the magnitude of orgasm is incredibly important here. So I would say that if there needs to be communication. So she needs to understand that this is indeed a pattern that exists in men, which is we're going to bond during a sexual experience, and then we're going to need to lick our wounds a little bit. And so if she understands that this is a dynamic, she's less likely to be hurt, or at least not as hurt.
Yes.
And yes. So again, this has to do with both sexes needing to be conscious of something that's occurring. Now, what ends up happening here is if a guy's ejaculating in a woman's mouth or on her chest or wherever, or with a computer screen, like, to me, it's mind-numbing to even consider this, because if I'm interested in cultivating a bond, whether I'm ejaculating with my partner or not, how do I explain this? I'd rather bond, or let me go back to the energy loop. So Tantra, there's an energy loop that exists in Tantra. I pressurize my partner pressurizes me. This increases the magnitude of orgasm. The greater the magnitude of orgasm, the greater the surge of dopamine, oxytocin, etc. So if the magnitude of orgasm is significant for a man, he has a much more intense rise in oxytocin. And this is more likely to generate a bond than him jerking off to a computer screen. And the reality is that a lot of men I know who messed up their relationships, they've messed it up because of masturbation. They've messed it up because they're ejaculating not with their partner. And so also in terms of energy loss, if you ejaculate with a partner, you also have a cycle. Her energy will essentially pressurize you, and you will pressurize her. So there's still less energy loss if you're releasing with a partner versus masturbation. So again, I don't, that whatever you were studying, like, it doesn't make sense to me. And I'm sure they have their logic and explanation of why such a thing makes any damn sense. Again, the reality here is that I'm thinking about magnitude of orgasm. That's how I look at it. And so you can look at it from a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is like, normal, there's nothing happening. 10 is like, you have an orgasm and you're seeing cliche cover of a Tantra book with a man and a woman wrapped in some sort of, ethereal mist, and like there's stars and sparkles and they're merging with the universe. Okay, so what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to build up to that point, right? So if you're masturbating, you're never going to get past a 6. So it requires a partner kind of situation in order to get to a 7 and 8, which will give you a greater flux of those chemicals, which will then lead to a greater potential for bonding. So anyway, yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to look at that kind of idea. I think I know what they're saying is like, they're basically saying that if you ejaculate alone or in her mouth, then somehow the bond being severing isn't as intense or something. Like, I don't get it.
Something like that. Yeah, something like that. But I'm very curious about this term that you used twice. One offline in our conversation when you said something about because the pressure is gone, because the pressure is gone. When the pressure is gone, the man's desire is gone. And now also you use the term pressurize. So can you explain a bit what do you mean here by pressurize, when you said pressurize each other, and when you say that the pressure is gone, so the desire is gone because the pressure is building up?
Yeah. So
can you explain about this a bit?
So emotion, energy and motion is pressure. So sadness would be a kind of pressure. Let's say I feel sadness and it wants to pressurize you to cry.
Okay.
And so anything that's leading, it's like a geyser. Everything is like a geyser. Every emotion is like a geyser. Hunger is a pressure. So the hunger, it drives you towards something, right? So sexual energy happens to be an extremely loud voice, and it is an intense pressure. Some men are very uncomfortable with sexual energy. And it's funny because men are so obsessed with sexual stuff. We're so focused on it, but yet we're kind of cowards. We're kind of cowards, and they're like, oh my God, I'm horny, I gotta rub it out. I'm sorry, I'm making fun of you guys, yes. But this is a reality. And I was actually rather disgusted with myself when I started realizing these dynamics of how incredibly, I guess, I'm trying to find a term that's not totally derogatory, but the point is I was flaccid as a person. I was like a jellyfish as a man. The reality is that, oh, horny rises, I gotta get rid of it. Oh, I can't deal with the sensation. When I started to really like connect into this power, that's the word power. It's a power and it's a pressure. Hunger is a power, it's a pressure. Some people, they don't eat. These are cranky people. They will change who they are as a human being if they don't eat. And if some God forbid, knock on wood, if humanity is ever confronted by massive starvation and famine or something like that, like I'm going to go isolate myself, because the people who can't handle fasting, they will come for you. They will come for your food. And because it's such an intense pressure. And sexual energy outside of, let's say, hunger and thirst, I would say is a good solid number 3 in terms of very loud pressures that express themselves through our experience. So that's what I mean by pressure.
And when you say men and women pressurize each other, so the energy is, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about human design systems. So one of the systems I work with is human design. It's a Western or a tropical astrology based system that also has the I Ching included into it, as well as Kabbalah. And so, and I'm not going to go too much further into that, but what it demonstrates, and this is what I really love about the system, is it shows the different chakras or energy centers. And so you can get, you know, the man and the woman, or the man and the man, or whatever the coupling situation is, because the reality is that coupling is an energy thing. It's not necessarily a gender thing. So yeah, I mean, in terms of reproduction and all that, yes, perhaps it's a gender thing, but the reality is that it's simply two eyes come together, they create a we. And so this we that is created is the conditioning field of the two auras that are intertwining. And so, other words, when I'm around certain women or men, they'll come into my energy body, their energy affects my energy. And what it ends is we end up generating this we in between, but in the process, I'm being conditioned. And so the way you can think about this is that you're around certain people, they bring out certain talents in you, right? And people are like, oh, well, that's just how people communicate. Well, what do you think energy is? Energy rises up and it causes communication. Energy rises up and it causes all sorts of things. So this is all it is. It's simply energy comes up before the mind grabs hold of it and gives it a storyline and expresses it. But the reality is, on a fundamental basic level, it's simply energy that is flowing between two individuals. And so, and again, a lot of this is unconscious and a lot of it is conscious. So when you're around somebody frequently, what ends up happening is you could say even early on, like I've had relationships where early on, I'll do like energy work on you know, a girlfriend or whatever. And so if I'm doing energy work on her early in the relationship, my energy will be more impactful because it's new energy and it's there to catharsis and to release some pattern perhaps that she's holding. And so over time, those patterns start to work their way out because we're constantly connecting in this we field. And so the conditioning is an evolution. So we start to evolve as human beings. Relationship is a massive evolutionary pressure or force. And so, so basically over time, when I'm work on her, still continue doing energy work, it's not as impactful. It doesn't mean that doesn't transform her, and it doesn't mean that I'm not helping her balance, but it simply means that her responses aren't as extreme because it's not as novel and it's not as new. And so the pressure is not hitting the same places in the same way. And so that's essentially what I mean by pressure, is that there's this intertwining of energy that exists. And so going back to the human design system, I can see this as a diagram. And that's what I really love about it. It's kind of like a way I can quantify that these dynamics are indeed occurring. So, but that's what I mean by the sort of pressure between two individuals.
So I think the takeout, I would say, or the takeaway from that podcast, especially for men and women, that biochemistry play a huge role in the dynamics of relationships after a sexual interaction. And it was really kind of very eye-opening for me, because we tend to be reactive as women immediately, and men actually, most men are completely clueless about their withdrawal symptoms, and they think that it's the natural progression after releasing semen, that they have to be that way, tired, want to just, you know, they take it as an kind of like an innate response, which is not. And they also act accordingly. So I think the big takeaway here is is women need to understand what goes, what men go through when they release semen, and men need to know that there is a huge consequence to releasing semen. And if you really want to maintain desire for your partner, you have to at some point abstain from releasing your semen, because then you will not have any desire for your woman. And you would think that if you change your partner, it's gonna change, but no, it's the problem is in the process. So I think that is, I'm so glad that we had this conversation, because so many people don't have no clue about this. So many men think that they lost interest in their women, but it's actually the process. And so many women think that men lose interest in them after having sex with them, but what happens is that their biochemistry changes, and it's a completely different dynamic. What happens is we get energized by sex and orgasm, and if you're kind of like a person who likes to have sex and energize, you would want more and more and more, and your partner won't be there to kind of meet you in that desire, because they operate on a completely different level, energetically and biochemically, if you will.
Right.
So I'm just happy that we kind of I don't know, demystified these things in this conversation.
Well, I guess one final thing I kind of bring up real quickly is that this severing of the bond thing. Yes, it does happen with. Excuse me. Sorry, I just blew out everyone's ears. But so the severing of the bond thing that happens with ejaculation is a thing, but also it shouldn't be blamed. And what I mean by that is that sometimes a relationship is simply not meant to be, in the sense of I think every relationship dynamic, we have to kind of go into it openly, and meaning like, yes, some relationships are meant to be short term, because again, relationships are evolutionary. So once that evolution exists, where the we dynamic between the two eyes has evolved to where it needs to be at that point, they say, well, I'm going to make this sound really bad, but when you do a business plan, they tell you have to like factor in an exit strategy. So in some ways, not that a relationship is like a business plan, but when you go into a relationship, you have to kind of stay open and not get to, I personally am very, and I'll blame the fact that I'm a Pisces and I'm very watery by nature, but I love fantasy, and I will fantasize a relationship 10, 15 years into the future. And it's not realistic. It's not realistic, and it's not considerate of the other person. So going into a relationship, tabula rasa or blank slate, I think is incredibly important, where it's like, hey, we're going to see where this relationship naturally evolves. If it evolves along a traditional path towards, let's say, marriage and that kind of thing, then bravo, great. That means that the evolutionary dynamic between the two pressures coming together is to go in that direction. Now, if it comes to the point where it's like you can start seeing character flaws coming to the surface and this and that, and I think a lot of the ways in which we determine our sort of exit strategy coming out of relationship, this is actually one of the reasons so in the video that I told you about, that I'm going to link down below the video, down below this, which talks about when to ejaculate, one of those factors of when a man should ejaculate is when he needs space from a woman, or a partner for that matter, is sometimes we need the clarity. And so ejaculating, and I don't think ejaculation isn't something that brings mental clarity, but it'll bring clarity in terms of like, it'll create a separation from the person you're with for some period of time, so you can kind of get a different perspective. So if I'm constantly charged up with desire, I get tunnel vision sexually, and I get tunnel vision in terms of the bonding aspect. And so what'll sometimes happen is I overlook other aspects to the dynamic. And so sometimes I need to ejaculate to create the separation so that I can then see the dynamic in a different light. So anyway, that's something else to kind of like factor in this whole equation. So yeah. So with all that said.
Oh, okay. I think we covered a nice chunk about this subject in that podcast.
For sure.
And yeah, and I would be excited and at the same time curious to see the feedback and to see how people react and how did they process these kind of information. And yeah, and let's see, maybe we'll do another one on the same subject or something related to it in the near future.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
It's great seeing you.
Thank you so much. Great seeing you too. And thank you for sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay. Namaste.
Okay, bye-bye. Namaste.
Bye.